And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on our show, Deborah Kobylt Live. And I have an incredibly special guest today, my friend, Margie Smith Holt, who wrote this incredible book, Not on Any Map: The One Virgin Island, Two Catastrophic Hurricanes, and the True Meaning of Paradise. Margie is also the founder of Rewrite, that is a writing and storytelling business with a focus on arts and nonprofits. She also volunteers at Visible Inc., and she'll tell us about that later. Margie lives in New York City with her husband, and she has quite an incredible story to tell with this book of hers, her first book, which, by the way, the writing was compared to Steinbeck. So congratulations, Margie.
Thank you, Deborah, and thanks for having me on. This is very exciting to be back together again. Do we get to talk about that, our illustrious history?
Oh, absolutely. Margie and I worked together at New Jersey Public Television. I was a reporter. You were an assignment editor at the time. You became a reporter, went on to Philadelphia, and we'll talk about our history later. But that's where the story sort of begins with you in this book, right? In Philadelphia. Right. And you were an established journalist. You also were working in public relations, and you sort of met the guy of your dreams. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, or so I thought, right? So you kind of have your ideas of where you're going to be at a certain age. And for me, it was hitting 40. And of course, by 40, I thought I would have my successful TV career and I would be married and I would have some kids. And suddenly 40 was looming. And it turned out I didn't have any of those things. So kind of took stock and thought, well, what am I doing? And then ended up going on this vacation with a friend. We went scuba diving and one thing led to another. And next thing I knew, I was quitting my job and moving down, which everybody says is their dream. So I'm told. Oh.
Right. But a couple of things that are interesting. I mean, the boyfriend decided to leave you to become a war correspondent. And I'm thinking, what was going on in that relationship where it's like, all right, it's either Margie or I'm going to go be a war correspondent, one or the other, you know? And so, just to be a little silly about it. Right.
Yeah, I mean, looking back on it now, we can certainly laugh about it, but that was a big heartbreak at the time and I, my default position would have been to just kind of throw myself into work. I was a hard worker. I've always been a hard worker. And I had another very good friend where I was working at the time who said, no, what you need is a vacation. And so she gets some of the credit for dragging me on this vacation that I didn't even want to go on, and just said, finally I got tired of listening to her come into my office every morning and say, we need to go diving. We need to go scuba diving. And I just handed her my credit card and said, here you go, book whatever you want. Stop bothering me. And she, that's exactly how it happened. Yeah. And she St. John, which I knew nothing about. I'd heard of the Virgin Islands, but didn't know anything about it. And that's how I ended up there the first time around.
This was with Jazz, right? Wasn't that her name?
Yes.
Okay. The characters in the book have the best names, I have to tell you. The places where you work, Skinny Legs. I mean, I believe your first apartment, the Cliffhanger. I mean, all the names in the books. And, that's not a double meaning right there. Just everything sort of, in a weird way, fell into place once you got to St. John, not knowing what the heck you were signing up for, right? So let's talk about that first trip down there, the vacation, and how you fell in love with the island.
So the first trip down, what actually happened was we were going down. It was Jazz and we had another friend. I had left the TV business at the time and was working at the Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts in Philadelphia, which was a brand new arts building. And I was doing their PR and media relations. And anyway, so we go on this vacation and the organization had layoffs. So while we were the layoffs came out while we were in the air on our way to vacation. So we had called in. Yeah, I mean, my job was fine. My friend's job was fine, but we found out other people we knew, including our really good friend Ellen, who I talk about in the book, had lost her job. And, and Jazz is saying, this is terrible. We need to bring her something back to cheer her up. And it's well, what does she need? She doesn't need a bottle of rum. She doesn't need a sarong, she needs a job. Hey, let's find her a job while we're here. So it's kind of started as this joke. So we'd go scuba diving and we had this fantastic vacation. And then at night we'd go out and go to our restaurants or bars or whatever. And we shops, hey, our friend needs a job. Do you have any jobs? And people just started telling these amazing stories about how they quit their job and decided to move down, or they couldn't stand another snowy winter in Minnesota, or they had lived there their whole lives and it was such a wonderful place to be. And then they give us their phone numbers, here, call. We always need good people. So by the end of the trip, I was like, forget her. I think I need to do this. And that was how it started.
Wow.
And
wow.
honestly,
So go ahead.
yeah, well, you're saying things kind of fell into place once we got there. Things started falling into place before we got there, which is kind of one of those amazing things where, you kind of say, well, you make the commitment to do something, and then it was almost a little, not to be too woo-woo, but a little bit of magic. Like you just sort of felt like one connection would lead to another, and things just kind of started happening.
I'm a firm believer that if something keeps speaking to us, we got to listen to that voice. If we're fortunate enough to be in a position where we can do that, right? So you did that. So then you went back to Philly, right? And then you said, why? And then you went back. Talk to us about that.
Right. So then it was, going back and, okay, well, you think, oh, I'm going to quit my job and move down. It's like, well, that's crazy. And, am I going to give up my career? And what about money? And what about, what if all these things? And then finally just decided, this was the right time of life to do this. Now it would be harder. Now there's other responsibilities. There's, if you don't have kids, there's aging parents, right? You're a woman of a certain age. There's responsibilities all over the place. But there is this little window where I had the opportunity, and I just started to think, well, what if I don't do it? Then, that's what I'm regret going. No, I'm going to regret if I don't do it.
Yeah.
So kind of the motivating factor.
You had a lot of support from the women in your life too, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. So I had an amazing group of women in Philadelphia. I mean, all through my television career. And then once I got to St. John, it was the women down there who kind of ran the show and taught me how to sail, and were just amazing examples of strong women. Oh.
So let's talk about sailing. I mean, did you sail along the Schuylkill in Philadelphia? That's a river that runs through Philadelphia, everybody, for those who don't know. Or did you learn for the first time when you went down to St. John? I've got to hear about this, because here's what I'm getting to, everybody. Margie ended up sailing across the Atlantic twice in a 30-foot wooden boat. So we're going to get to that. But when was your first sailing lesson, Margie?
The first sailing lesson. So I had been on a sailboat, I think, exactly once before I went to St. John as a kid, with a trip to Florida with my mom, who had recently been sailing somewhere. And we sat on a lake with no wind and didn't do anything for an hour. It's like, well, I love the water. I swim. I'm a scuba diver. I love the diving. Right. And got to St. John, where I ended up living. This community, which is kind of this little outpost on the far side of the island, was a sailing community. So it kind of like, well, I guess I'm here to learn how to sail, because everybody here sails. And that's how that got started. And just that's all anybody talked about. So I just started talking my way onto anybody's boat that would take me out, and then finally got lessons. Probably took about 6 months, because if you've ever lived in a Caribbean setting, like we go, and Northerners go in the winter, because to get out of the cold, and we think it's warm, but they think the water's cold in December and January and February. So I had to wait about 6 months to actually get an official lesson. But I did. And then, kind of one thing led to another.
The boat that you went on, tell us about what led to this, when it was all of a sudden you're getting sailing lessons, and about 2 years later, you're on a 30-foot wooden boat that I believe was handmade, right? And how many in the crew? I mean, who said, I have an idea, let's go across the Atlantic? Like, how does that happen? Because I would have been like, I don't think so. Really, I would have been fish food. So let's talk about that.
So I was doing a lot of sailing in St. John. I was doing a lot of the races down there, and I had met a guy. So at some point I was thinking, I've been down there 2 seasons, like, well, maybe this will be the end. Like I'm not sure what's next for me in life, but right. Doing the sailing, and everybody talked about this big sailboat regatta in Antigua, which was the end of the sailing season in the Caribbean. And that was kind of like the holy grail of Caribbean sailing. So I thought, well, I'd like to maybe go to Antigua at the end of the season. And then after that, I don't know, maybe I'll go home to Philadelphia, figure out what my next move is. And I was talking to one of my friends, one of the other waitresses at Skinny Legs at the bar where I waitress, and said, well, I think I'm going to try to find a boat and sail down to Antigua and race in that regatta, because, that's sort of my goal. And she was like, well, yeah. And then when you get there, then you have to walk around and find one of the yachts that's going across the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, because how many people can say they've sailed across the Atlantic in their lives? And I was like, well, okay. That's actually what ended up happening. The 30-foot boat was a friend from St. John. He's another amazing story. We call him Captain Kidd in the book. Mm-hmm. And this guy grew up in Cape Cod and started building his own boat when he was 17. So he spent 5 years building this all traditional wooden boat. I mean, it was like something out of Moby Dick. It had, oil running lights, no engine, no, all wood, beautiful, beautiful boat. Spent 5 years building it. And then, people to say I have a great story. I have nothing on some of these people I've met down there. And he builds the boat, finishes it up, gets in the boat, and sails to the Caribbean, where he knows nobody. And I meet this guy, and he's 24 when I meet him. How do you grow up thinking that this is an option? I didn't know anybody that ever did that. I mean, you just, you go to school, you work hard, you get your job, you do the next thing, right? So I'm intrigued with him and wanted to write a story about him. And he was kind of a quiet guy. So and he had said, he wanted to go to Antigua as well and sail across the ocean. And I was just like, there's no way I'm sailing across the Atlantic in a 30-foot boat. But I did sail with him to Antigua, and I did this when we had a couple people on board, and we raced in the regatta, and that was great. And then I found my first sail across the Atlantic was in a 110-foot yacht with a crew of 6. So that was, that was a little more normal. And then,
but wait a minute. Along the way, I mean, that's really not normal to the rest of us, Margie, because you're not a lifelong sailor. This was still somewhat new to you, right? I mean, everybody else is sitting there. Everyone else is back at home complaining about the job in Philly, New Jersey, or out here in LA, and you're down in the Caribbean figuring out your next move, just saying, why not? I'll get on a bigger boat and I'll just go across to the Mediterranean. What were the stops? What were you thinking? What was going through your mind? And about that war correspondent, were you still thinking about him too? I mean, I need answers to all of this.
Yeah, you sort of have those moments where you think you're going to have the Hollywood result where he's going to show up and profess his love, and that'll be the big happy ending. Of course, that didn't happen, but that's okay. That's way it's way in the past now. It's kind of hard. It's hard to remember a time before social media, right? So we're not going to talk about our ages and when we worked together, but there was
clearly much older than I was, Margie, but continue.
That's right. And so no social media, but I did have a little email list, and I was writing some little stories home to the people at home, still doing, and I had a lot of support there saying, keep going, don't come back. There's no reason to come back. Just keep going. So I had a little bit of that kind of support from people who were maybe, living vicariously a little bit. And that was fun. And kind of the same thing when I got across the Atlantic and thought, okay, now what? Am I gonna go home to Philly, or just keep going? And I had this sort of flood of emails from people back home saying, just keep going, see what's next. And that's what I did.
How many days did that trip take? And you've got to give us some little tidbits of along the way. There was no bathroom, right? That couldn't have been easy for you. I can only imagine what happened, but that's not so easy. What was the weather like? All of it, because the closest I ever came to that was just being on a very small boat going through the Galapagos for 2 weeks. Okay. And I remember one night, and I was not piloting anything, I was a passenger, and I remember one night just looking up, the stars were so bright, right? I'm sure that's an incredible moment. And I remember feeling like a little flake of fish food, thinking if anything happened, I'm just a little piece of food for something or somebody, and that's the end of that. Did you ever feel that way? Like, I'm just so small in this universe of stars. What was going through your mind? Because it is transformative, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I sailed back to the Caribbean, so that was on the 30-foot boat, and there was just 2 of us on board. And so, you know what that essentially means. I mean, he was the captain. He knew what to do with things, but we took turns keeping watch. So there were definitely times when, you know, you'd spend half the night alone on deck. That's it. And it's just like, as you just said, this incredible canopy of stars. And you just realize you're this tiny little speck in the universe, but there wasn't any fear to that. It was just this tremendous sense of awe, right? I mean, had there been any last vestiges of thinking, what am I doing? Or what about the old job? Or what about the old heartache and the old boyfriend, you know, poof goes.
Yeah. Any moments that were really a little terrifying and you thought that you could tell our audience about? Because I know there were quite a few, please.
Everybody always asks about the storms. And I always have to say we had one really bad storm and I slept through it. And that is not even a lie. So,
wow.
You know, we knew some bad weather was coming. This, again, when I talk about this Captain Kidd, I just have so much respect for him. He's just an incredible sailor, a very, very calm person. So you never, like, if he ever panicked or he was ever scared, I never saw it. And the boat was sturdy and we had done what we could. And at some point, there's sort of nothing else you can do. And so I was kind of, you know, the worst of it started when he was on watch and I was sleeping anyway. And by the time I kind of woke up and thought, yeah, it's kind of bad out there. He's not up there. He's sort of down here reporting on the lightning and describing what it's like. And I just thought, I think I'm going to stay right here. and that's kind of what I did. I figured I'm not freaking out. I'm not in the way. He'll grab me if he needs me to do anything, but there was nothing to do. You really are at the mercy of the ocean at that point. And all you can kind of do is just ride it out. So
how beautiful. Wow.
You know,
did you come into contact with any larger ships and everything else that you could tell my people about? Because this to me is just extraordinary. It takes guts. It takes balls. It takes a lot of everything. And here you are talking about it as though, oh, well, you know, I'm just staying down and he's keeping watch and how lovely. There goes a whale. You know, there's a lot more to this. There's tremendous skill. There's tremendous reserve, which you do have, Margie. I've worked with you. Tremendous reserve, which I think is a skill and it got you through it. And it's a personality type too, because I think if I were on it, I'd be like, that guy's bigger than us. You know, there's a lot to think about.
I think one of the things that helped me out when I started doing some of the longer distance sailing was, a personality thing. I was like, okay, I don't have a lot of skill, but but I'm a good listener and I'm a fast learner and I'm pretty calm. Like I'm not a freaker outer. So that made me a good addition to a crew, as long as you had people that really knew what they were doing to actually maneuver the boat when something happened. And I think also when I sailed across the Atlantic the first time, and then I was in the Mediterranean, we'd done some crossings over there, and we just had great, most of my long distance sails, we had really good, lucky weather. So I didn't have any horrible experiences, because sailors love to talk about their scary, horrible experiences. In fact, before I did the first trip, anytime I said, oh, I'm going to do my first long distance sail was the Caribbean up to Newport in Rhode Island. And everybody just wants to tell you about their horrible stories, the 3 days of storms or the time they almost capsized or this. And finally, I was just like, I don't want to hear this. Like, stop telling me this. I just want to kind of say, okay, it's going to be okay. And then the one person that kind of became a mantra said, oh, well, don't worry about it. Most boats make it. So that kind of became it'll probably be fine. Most boats come in, most boats make it. So just the combination of kind of being calm, I guess, and having had so many good experiences with so many good, I sailed with some of the finest sailors, I believe, anywhere in the world. There's yacht racing with all the testosterone and the America's Cup and that kind of thing.
Right.
This community was this sort of old school, traditional boat, slow sailing. So it was full of people with these kind of calm temperaments. And I think that's what appealed to me. That's what kind of gave me my in, that it was, I just felt like the people that I was sailing with were, they knew what they were doing. So
very far from the, the deadlines of daily news, that's for sure, right, where people are running through newsrooms and something's breaking and there goes a car chase. And it's like, and then all of a sudden there's this peaceful calm. What a beautiful way to live. So the first time over there was a 22-day trip. Is that correct?
20, that sounds right. Yes. You probably read
Why
the book
not?
recently than I have. Yes.
I'll tell
First,
you the detail. I'll tell you the details, Margie. Don't worry about it. And then you landed where? And then on your way back, that was the two-person, right? On
yes.
the way back. That
Yeah.
to me is extraordinary, honest to God, to say, okay, we're going back and it's just the two of us. Even about keeping watch to make sure that you're not dozing off.
Right.
Did that ever happen?
No.
Did you just never? I love it.
Certainly had times when you were tired, it's kind of like getting up for a morning shift, right? Like, oh, I know, but
but you do it. I think all that news training is what helped you. That's what it is.
Yeah,
And working with me, God knows, that's definitely probably what helped you. But after the first time over, you landed where and spent time there? Where? That first Atlantic crossing.
So we sailed, we left Antigua and we stopped in the Azores, which is this little island chain in the middle of the Atlantic. It's part of Portugal, but that's also kind of in the middle of nowhere. So that was this sort of, really interesting stop. And then from there, I guess I thought we were going to go, these big yachts, they move from place to place, depending on the season, right? So this is just crew that moves it for the owners to enjoy it in the Mediterranean, the Caribbean. So I thought, after we crossed the Atlantic, we would end up in the south of France, or in Spain, which are big yachting centers, and I'd be able to get find a job on one of the boats for the season. And we ended up in Malta, which was another place I had never heard of. I was just
beautiful.
I'd sort of
beautiful.
Didn't really where is that exactly? And I'd get out the map to kind of find out where it was, and I think between the Atlantic crossing and then that stop there, because that was the point where I was like, okay, am I going to go home? Am I done? Is this whole little odyssey over? I sailed across the Atlantic in this big boat. I've done, I did the Caribbean, the 2 years in the Caribbean. I could go home and feel pretty good about what I did. So, but here I was in this place that's kind of has this incredible history that I knew nothing about, and this sort of crossroads where East meets West. And again, this was kind of when these emails sort of started pouring in, and you had to go to an internet cafe to get your email, right? This wasn't just, you weren't getting it off,
no, right.
No, and saying, stay in Malta and see what happens next. And then that led to, I did a summer of classic yacht racing throughout the Mediterranean. We were in Saint-Tropez, we were in Sardinia. It was very glamorous on these beautiful old restored boats from the 20s, like what you would picture in the Great Gatsby or something. So that was great. And then at the end of the season, I heard from my friend from St. John in the little boat, Captain Kidd. He had sailed over the Atlantic with a girlfriend, and that didn't work out. And then so he was there with the boat, no crew, wanted to bring it home, and he wrote to me his quote unquote first email ever, asking, would I help him bring the boat home? So how do you say no to that? So
absolutely.
That's how I ended up.
That, right. And then you go back to the Caribbean. And I do know that you also ended up back in Philadelphia because you had a tremendous health scare, which was a reality. Could you tell us about that?
So, right. So after that sail back, I had enough boat experience to kind of start working on boats, which I thought, well, that would be kind of fun to really travel a little bit more around the Caribbean. And I'd started doing that when I found a lump in my neck, and it turned out to be Hodgkin's, and I had to go home for treatment. And that and I'm fine now, but that kind of put an end to the adventure. So
yeah. And I know the idea of this book has been sitting with you for 17 years. And in between that, there were hurricanes. There was so much. You've done tremendous work raising money for the people there. Let's talk a little bit about the relationships that you built there first. The lifelong relationships, and different in a way than the kind of relationships that we make here, right? Because it is a different life, and it must have been, it's a beautiful thing. Could you tell us about that, about what that was like, experiencing life there daily with the people, and then going back to help them when you didn't know what was left?
Yeah, I can't take any credit for raising money. I will say, I think you're probably remembering when the hurricanes first happened, and I kind of put out an appeal to all my friends in the press to pay attention, because it was 2017. There were the Virgin Islands got hit with 2 Category 5 hurricanes. And I was in New Jersey at the time, and I remember watching on television as the storm was coming and everybody's talking about it hitting, hitting Florida, as you would, I guess, if you're a meteorologist in the U.S. But at the meantime, you're looking at this hurricane map, and this gigantic storm is sitting on top of the Caribbean, and in the middle of it is the Virgin Islands, and no one's talking. And then as the storm moved past, I think it was something like 48 hours before there was any news at all. So no one who wasn't there knew what happened. Like, did people live? Did they make it? What had happened? And so I kind of put out an appeal saying, this is part of the U.S., so let's not forget the Virgin Islands when we're talking about all the destruction in the Caribbean. And somebody else I used to work with in the news business had said, you need to go down and tell this story.
Right.
And I said, well, I don't work in the news business anymore. I don't have a platform. I don't work, and he's like, who cares? This is a story.
True. It's a story, and it doesn't matter. By then, of course, we all had social media, because that's how I found out about what was going on where you were. And you did put out a plea, and many of us did respond to that. But whatever little we may have donated, it's something to the cause, to something that was so close to your heart. So you went back down.
Right. And then I went back down to try to, first of all, to find out what happened. And to tell that story. I had, up to that point, the idea of the book was always in the back of my head. Like, I hate to keep dating my age, but when I was first down there and people would say you should write a book, people who weren't celebrities didn't write memoirs, right? That's a more recent thing. So it was kind of a back of the mind thing, but I did finally get to it. And I did finally put together some of these stories from my time down there and the sails across the Atlantic. And literally, I think it was 2 weeks before the hurricanes hit that I started pitching to see if I could find an agent, if there was any interest. And then the hurricanes hit, and then suddenly it's, well, I don't even know if this place exists anymore. I'm writing what's my book is essentially a love place.
Right.
That changed my life, and that I think is this kind of magical place. And now I couldn't even get information about whether it existed. So I went down, maybe half a dozen times over the next year to kind of pop in at different times when I could get down, when I could find a place to stay. I didn't want, you don't want to be a drain on the resources. I wasn't going down to build houses. I would, or take money. I was going down to write a story. And I did have these relationships with so many people there from when I was there the previous time, and had been writing for the local newspaper little stories about everything, that people kind of trusted me to tell their story. So that was validating for me that they would. And some of them, some of the people who are interviewed, whose stories are in the book, didn't tell their story till a year later. It's a traumatic experience for those people.
It's interesting because when you were down there, you were working as a reporter. You just can't get away from it, Margie. You can't, for the local newspaper, right? Yeah. They got you to do that. Was that at the same time that you were working for Skinny Legs? I just love the name of that place, Skinny Legs. That's one of the best places, and only I can see you working at Skinny Legs, I have to tell you. Not that I've checked out your legs, you have nice legs, but what a great place. And I love that the first time you met your husband, right? He was wearing a Skinny Legs t-shirt. Is that correct?
He had, the first time I met some of his friends, he was wearing a Skinny Legs t-shirt that I brought for him, but I was meeting I was meeting some of his friends for the first time, and, they ignored me and saw him wearing the shirt, and they were like, oh, Skinny Legs. We love Skinny Legs. We have a great Skinny Legs t-shirt, a Skinny Legs story. And my husband said, so does she. And
so does she.
They were so busy talking about, their trip they took to St. John 10 years ago before they had kids, and their day they went out and had lunch at Skinny Legs. And this is the kind of story you hear from people, that, whatever it is about this little island that touches so many people, it's just interesting. If I wear my Skinny Legs t-shirt now, I could be out anywhere and someone will come up and say something, because they've St. John and they've been to Skinny Legs and they love it. They capital LOVE, love it.
Yeah. So you come back and you're living in Manhattan, right? And what is that like? Because even just coming back from an ordinary vacation, you feel a little out of sorts. How do you assimilate back into society? And so now you're married, you're living in New York City, you're back thinking about the book, thinking about the people there. You've recovered from cancer, thankfully. Um, what do you do? What did you do? What were you thinking about? Or was it just a sea of calm because you've been through so much and it was such a wonderful experience in your life? What goes through your head?
It's so interesting because I think one of the challenges is always to hold on to some of that, partially calm and partially just kind of different way of looking at things. You mentioned earlier about that calmness of being out on the boat and compared to the deadlines of TV. I mean, there was a time when I was sailing on the little boat, we had my longest time without seeing land was 16 days. So we were 16 days out there with no land, and you're crossing, I don't know, 4 or 5 time zones making that trip. And so it's like deadlines, like what's time? Like time was whatever we said it was. So, we're crossing these times. And, if the sun didn't come up at the end of my last watch, then I knew it was time. We were in a new time zone and we would change the clock. So I'm like, I'm deciding when the time changes. Like that was a very cool moment of feeling like, okay, there's the stars. And yes, I'm this little speck in the universe and I decide what time it is. And, when you're having that moment, truly nothing else matters. And so I think holding on to that is important. I mean, when I visit my friends on St. John, like they will sit outside and watch the moon rise, and that will be, an evening activity. And so you definitely come back at first, and there's that kind of, okay, I don't know when the sun's coming up. I don't know when the sun is setting. I'm commuting now for a job, and it is a little disorienting. You kind of feel like, did I just do that? Did that just happen? So it definitely was some effort, and continues to be, to kind of hold on to that. And I mean, we all see, right? We're all looking for that balance, because it's so easy to get caught up in the deadlines and the running around, and there are responsibilities and other things, but to just kind of take a breath and say, okay, I have an alarm. This is a nerdy thing. I have an alarm on my phone for sunset. And so it's just to remember, you can go outside. There's a nice view from the rooftop deck in New York. I can see the sun come up. I can see the sun go down, but you got to remember to go out and do it, as opposed to when you're living kind of more of an outdoor existence in a place like a Caribbean island or on a sailboat where you're really outdoors. So but it's work to remember to do that.
How often do you go back? Sorry.
We try to get back, my husband and I, usually every year. So the last 2 years it's been, then of course we had COVID, so that shut everything down for a couple of years, just like everywhere else. But in the last couple of years, it's been maybe twice a year as I was getting the book finished.
How did they do down there with COVID? Because obviously people weren't visiting. Was it that bad or not really? Because, people were sort of staying put there.
It was bad economically because, they were just recovering from the hurricanes, so that was 2017. And so that's recovery all of 2018, 2019. Maybe people were just getting to the point, after maybe 2 years where they were feeling like things were starting to come back together, and then COVID happened. So it's been a rough couple of years down there. A couple of years, not so. I mean, things are on the upswing. Yeah.
It's interesting when you go ahead. Okay, go ahead.
For those who made it. I mean, there are people who left and will never come back. So I mean, there's if you go today, you might not notice that there ever was anything. I mean, things are rebuilt and businesses are thriving and the island is beautiful. But some of the stories that you don't see.
Just incredible. So we should talk a little bit about how we met. Right. Go ahead, Margie. You go first. Take it away.
I cannot find a single photo of us working together, which I can't even believe. So,
here's what's weird. I don't even think we took a lot of photos then, right? Everything was on video. You didn't have a cell phone, and I didn't have like a Kodak Instamatic or anything, just in my purse. We just didn't do it. You did your show. You went live for the news, and that was the end of that. But we met in South Jersey. Go ahead. And you okay, I'll start. You walked in and you were the assignment editor down there. For people who don't know, the assignment editor sort of helps you, helps assign what's going on, what you're going out on that day. So I don't know who was the boss. I'm not sure if you were my boss or I was your boss.
That's up for debate.
That's up for debate. So go ahead, Margie, take it away.
I don't know. I mean, did I work for you or did I tell you what to do? It's a little of both, maybe.
Honestly, it was a great relationship because I know we both respected working for each other very much. You would call me a diva, and 90210, I do not know how you got this idea in your head that I was a diva and started calling me by the Beverly Hills 90210 zip code, but whatever. I always looked at you as quite sensible and knowledgeable, and if you sent us down a road for a story, then we'd be okay. Me, I ended up the diva in your mind. So go ahead.
Well, I think I was sensible and practical. I think I am. But yeah, I think even in our little tiny South Jersey, sort of neglected bureau team of 4, you were always ready for, your California Hollywood life. Oh, like you're in, like that's where you belonged even then. I think that's where 90210 came from. So
it's actually very funny, but
I was just a Jersey girl. So
I kind of was too, just a Jersey girl. But what was funny was, we worked. I guess somehow I was there. But what's interesting was our beautiful, wonderful cameraman Frank, sound man Bob. We also worked with Ron, who's no longer with us. We were a small little enclave down there, right? And you're right. We needed a megaphone for people to listen to us. Back in the bureau, up in North Jersey and in the state capital of Trenton, and we really needed that megaphone. It's like, hello, this is what we're doing today.
We're here. Look at us.
And you were really great at fighting for that, if you will. Not that you fought, but because I think you were well respected up there, right?
That's a nice compliment. But you're right. And those things you learn that you kind of have to speak up for yourself and make your own way and let them know you're there. And yeah, I mean, it might sound silly talking about it now, but right, you had your main offices wherever, and you're just this little satellite office, and you had to kind of keep reminding people, and you reminded people by doing a good job and then also being a big mouth.
You were terrific. You were very responsible. And then I know you had your eye on being a reporter, so you got your foot and kicked me out the door to Los Angeles with my husband. Right,
my goal was to get you out of there so I could take your job.
which you did a fantastic job, and then you ended up in Philadelphia, one of the top markets in the country as a reporter. I mean, you're a 5-time Emmy award-winning journalist, got more Emmys than I do, and you're a terrific journalist, and that's why, and also writer, because the two are not the same at all. I can do news writing and little blurps, but I couldn't even imagine venturing into something like this. Did you take a class? Did you, just go on Google and this is how you write a book? Because this is outstanding and very heartfelt. I will tell you, as you describe your adventures, that's the Margie I know that I've worked with. But to read it on the written page is quite extraordinary and comes from deep within your heart, So I want people to pick up this book because it's beautifully written and told. How did you manage to do that, Ms. Steinbeck?
Thank you. A number of readers have said, I feel like I was right there with you, and that's a great compliment. Being in television journalism, as you know, depending on the crowd you're in, is sometimes sort of like the little, neglected stepsister to the print world. At least it used to be back in the day. And when I was first writing some stories from St. John back to my little email list at home, and one of my newspaper friends said, "Oh, how were you ever in television with this, being this good of a writer?" I had no idea. It's just a little kind of like backhanded compliment, but because I always sort of felt like, you're trying to live up to the standards of the print people who didn't take to television seriously. And you
did it. You did just fine here.
Thank you. Yeah. Oh, thank you. I think I tell people, I said, I had a whole career in journalism and never really thought of myself as a writer until I was on St. John. So here I am, working at my waitressing job at Skinny Legs, which, by the way, I'd never done that before either. I had to talk my way into the waitressing job and figure that out. So I got lucky. And it was kind of a brain shift, right? So I started out saying, I don't want to write for the paper down there. I don't want to do anything like I used to do. I want to change. And when I'd be, talking to customers and doing my waitressing job and just kind of doing these other things, I just felt like my brain freed up. I didn't have to think about all these other little things I was used to be thinking about all day long. Or when I was doing PR, like, oh, did I make this phone call and I do this? And so, at night I'd get home. There wasn't anything to do once the sun went down, and I would write, and I just felt this creative streak that I had maybe never felt, or maybe not felt since I was a kid, or, writing in my journal as a teenager or whatever.
Yeah.
Just was I just felt more creative than I had ever felt. And it's interesting too, because I worked with obviously a lot of 20 somethings. I was 40, a lot of 20-year-olds that were down there, before going to school or, trying to decide what they want to do with their lives. And one of my very good friends would always say, like, I feel like I never used my brain here. And I'm like, really? I feel the opposite. I feel like my brain is so not full with all the junk I spent the last 20 years thinking about, that now I can do something creative. And that was writing. So,
it's interesting. Go ahead.
I just kind of would write these stories, and, my Jazz would come home from she worked nights, and in the morning we'd have coffee and I'd read her what I wrote the night before. And, if I could make her laugh, then I knew, I got something. And then, polish it up and send it off to the folks at home, and then the local newspaper once they corralled me. But that's how that started.
Yeah. Well, there's something very freeing about pen and paper. You don't need to worry about video. You don't need to worry about who's watching you, looking at you, listening to you. It's just you and your pen and your paper. I remember being a little kid, and I had my dad's IBM Selectric on the dining room table. I would just, type out stories, and it was just me and my typewriter. And for you, it was you and your pen, right? And nothing can really come in between that, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a journaler, so there was that, and I did actually have my laptop down there, so it was that too. But it was right. I didn't have to think about a deadline. I didn't have to. It was just, well, let me just write this and see, see where it goes. Yeah, it's great.
So let's talk about the film, because this is such an extraordinary book. Look, everybody's got their, to talk about another book that became a film, everybody's got their eat, pray, love moment, right? But this is, in my opinion, even quite more extraordinary, because again, it has the element of sailing across the Atlantic, not once, but twice. Talk about your, if you want to call it, your midlife shift in life. You've done it. So let's talk about the film, please. Who do we see playing you, Margie? And I know you're going to write me in, and let's talk about who's going to play me. But go ahead. Who do you have?
Well, back in the day, of course, it was, Reese Witherspoon, obviously, you'd have to say. Mm-hmm. And she's got the production company. So that would be great. Or, listen, anybody would be fantastic. What do you think? Who do you think should play?
Well, I see Emma Stone. I do. I really, really do. I see Emma Stone. I see it going through Reese's production company. Maybe, I don't know who's a young Reese, really, but Reese could play 40. So I think Reese could do this, because I think she's in her 40s. So I think she could do this. Let's put Reese first. Then if she turns it down, then we'll go to Emma with Reese's production company, right? I mean, this is an extraordinary story. It deserves to be told. It's in the right time with women doing really gutsy, ballsy things. Only you did it before that was even in fashion, which was quite amazing.
Well, so, I have, listen, I appreciate all, it's that's very nice. And I'm trying not to downplay what I've done, right? Because it's a pretty good story.
It's big. Yeah.
I have to say, going down there, everybody you meet has anybody anywhere has stories, right? So everybody's got a story. The women that I met in the Caribbean that taught me to sail, they all have incredible stories. And, so I have done things that you just think, you did that, they've sailed around the world. They're submarine captains there. I mean, there's just incredible stories. But you make a great point. I mean, this I feel like this is a time now where, there are women in Hollywood who are getting the juice to tell more of these stories. And we're seeing women on television and in the movies who, are older than 40. And it's been a long pull to get there. But we're seeing not enough of it, but at least a little bit more of it. So, can we get a meeting? Who do you know? Let's get a meeting.
A few people. I've been putting it out there a little bit at a dinner I was out the other day. But you said something earlier, because we're gonna have to go in a minute. that, you were 40 years old, you didn't have any responsibilities, it was the right time. I look at what you did and I thought, my kids are, in college and growing, and I'm thinking, I want to do something like this. I am not going across the ocean, but I think you can be gutsy at any age, people. I really do, because when is there a time, right? Because one day we're just going to be, you look up and we're just going to be part of all that. So why not go for it while we're here? Don't you think? I mean, that's what I got out of this book. Like, my God, she did it then, I could do it now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you should. Yeah. So
yeah,
I think I've been hearing people talk a lot lately about, failure, people talking about their failures, right? And it's just, this whole thing happened because I didn't get what I wanted or what I thought I wanted, right? Here's what I thought I should have. It's like, okay, plan B turned out to be like really good. But
yeah, so take note of that, right? Take note of our failures, because they lead us where we're supposed to go. They're never failures. That's just hard to realize at the time, right? When we're struggling.
Right.
Yeah.
And to take risk, because what's the worst that can happen? That was a question I kept saying to mine. What's the worst that can happen? You go home, you get another job. You'll like, what's the worst that can happen? Oh, you might actually have a good time or learn something new or have an amazing adventure and be able to write a book about it. So, so that's inspiring. I think that's great. And like I said, and the people that I was able to also write about in the book, they're incredibly inspiring and resilient. And I talk about a plan B, right? Your whole island gets blown away and you have to rebuild your life. So, but people do, and they do humor and grace, and that's amazing too.
Now, you just put this book out. What is there a second book behind this? What is, I don't like to ask this, but because, what is next? What are you thinking could be next? Is there another book? Or you're just taking this moment at a time?
I'm taking it a moment at a time. Yeah, I think it'd be fun to try to do a screenplay, maybe fictionalize it. That's because this is all true, and that was work. So it might be some fun to kind of put it in a screenplay form and get back to that creative process, right? It wouldn't be a deadline. It's just, let's just do it. See how it goes. And then, just trying to promote the book a little bit. So we'll see how that goes too.
Well, why don't you give a shout out to the book? Where can people find it? And also anybody else you want to give a shout out to is great. Please do.
Well, shout out to you. Thank you so much for having me on. I really, truly appreciate it. And it's been great to reconnect. And I keep telling myself that, this is supposed to be fun. So if I get to reconnect with old colleagues and friends and talk to other women who have done amazing things, again, when you think about how many things you've accomplished in your life since we worked together, like it's just fun to make those connections again. The book is not on any map, and it's you can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it anywhere you buy your books. If you have a favorite local independent bookstore, you can order it from them. Amazon's probably the easiest. And my website is margiesmithholt.com. And from there, you can find all my social media information to stay in touch that way. So
beautiful. And we'll be pushing this out also on our social media, on our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then our show also is transitioned over into audio podcasts as well. It's on iHeart. It's everywhere. I mean, wherever Apple Podcasts, just wherever you get your audio podcasts as well, you can find our interview and information about Margie. We're going to post all that. So Margie, thank you so much for joining us. I really look forward to seeing you either in New York or out here. I know I was recently back east and you weren't there, and I'm like, oh man, of course I didn't give you much notice, but on my next trip out there, I hope to see you, or vice versa. And congratulations. This is a beautiful story. Please pick it up. Not on any map. One of the best written, most inspiring stories I've read. I read a lot of books, particularly for work, and this is definitely one of my favorites. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us for our show today, and for all of our friends who may be watching in New Jersey that we worked with. Thanks for the support. Make sure all your friends and family go out and buy the book. So Deborah Kobylt Live. My name is Deborah Zara Kobylt, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.